Before you watch this video, I need to give you a little context. What you're about to see was recorded in 2012. At the time, I was a member of Janesville City Council, originally from Moscow, Russia, immigrant to the United States, and I was invited to speak to students at Craig High School here in Janesville, Wisconsin. On the surface, I was there to talk about family, history, immigration, where I come from. But looking back now, with everything we know, I realized that what I was really doing, without fully naming it yet, was explaining a system. Because Russia isn't really just a country, it's a system. And systems don't die when leaders die. This talk centers on my family, yes. My grandfather, Mikhail Kotlyar, who survived Stalin's Gulag, a great-grandfather once removed who became the third president of the State of Israel, parents who sold everything they owned and started from zero in their late 40s just to give their children a chance at a different life. Those are interesting stories on their own. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about how a dictatorship trains people to live inside distortion, and how that distortion survives the dictator. My grandfather's biography had to be rewritten more than once, first to satisfy a social rule that a husband must be older than his wife, then to survive a political one. In 1937, one of the worst years of Stalin's purges, he was arrested as an enemy of the people. That phrase matters, because it's not a charge, it's not something you defend against. It's a category, kind of like domestic terrorist. Once you are placed inside it, the conversation ends. Facts no longer matter. Explanation no longer exists. If that sounds familiar to modern ears, it should. And here's the part that still stays with me. When my grandfather came back alive, one of the very few people who did, very few, people didn't come to ask questions. They didn't come to hear stories. They didn't want details. People came quietly to the apartment, they looked at my grandfather, and they left. Because in a world where millions disappeared, survival itself was already a message and a miracle. That detail isn't sentimental, it's instructional. It tells you what total fear does to a society. It doesn't just punish bodies, it trains everyone else. It teaches silence and it teaches coded speech. It teaches adaptation. It creates a strange moral economy where presence becomes testimony because language is too dangerous to trust. As you watch this video, you will see how that system shapes everything, how calendar is split in two, how religion survives through fables and allegory, how art learns to speak sideways, how military parades become the most public form of joy a child is allowed to see. And yes, you'll see humor, absurdity, and everyday life. Because that's the most dangerous part. A system like this doesn't look monstrous from the inside. It looks normal. That's why this video matters now. Because if you've ever wondered why normal diplomacy keeps failing with Russia, why people keep hoping the system will reform, why outsiders keep thinking this is just one bad leader, this is the context they're missing. So don't watch this as a history lecture. Watch it as a map of how a system trains generations and how the training doesn't disappear when the statues come down. First picture. This is my grandfather, Mikhail Kotlyar. When Grandpa passed away, we weren't sure if he passed away at the age of 85 or 95. And the reason for that was that his wife, my grandmother, was a couple of years older than he was. And so when they got married, that was unacceptable for a man to be younger than the wife. So when the 1917 Soviet Revolution happened and everybody got new paperwork, grandfather, I think, added himself 10 years in age to be older than his wife. He managed to rise to some prominence in Soviet government, and as many people, about 20 million of them, was arrested and sent to Stalin's concentration camps. Has anybody here heard of Joseph Stalin? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, awesome. Gotta know your dictators, guys. So, Joseph Stalin came to power roughly in, I think, 1929 and was Soviet leader until 1953 when he passed away, supposedly poisoned or at least had a heart attack and nobody helped him. Kind of a charming leader that was responsible for the death of 20 million people by some counts. My grandfather was arrested and sentenced. Well, he survived. First of all, he wasn't executed on the spot because even though he was arrested as enemy of the people, which was a very wide swath, he wasn't a member of Communist Party. He never wanted to join, decided that he better not join the party. Turned out it saved his life because members of Communist Party, which people joined to, that was like a part of promotion in life. Oh, you're good enough, you should join the party. So he never joined, and people who were members and were arrested as enemy of the people, they were executed right away. Because that was the worst thing you could be. Oh my gosh, you betrayed your homeland, your fatherland, motherland, and you are a member of the party. Well, you're the worst of the worst. And so those poor people were executed. My grandfather was instead sentenced to camps. And he was one of the very few people that ever came out before Stalin's death. When Stalin died in 1953, then all the gates were open and everyone was let out, including lots of actual criminals, but until 1953, very, very few people ever made it out. My grandfather was one of those, in part because my grandmother was an attorney and she never let his file get lost, but also because he was, with Stalin, he would put his loyal henchmen in different positions of power, and then they would kind of rise up through the ranks, get better at it, and before they would get too good, he would sack them and replace them with the next level of henchmen, so that he was always knew that he had support of people who were loyal, but if they didn't know much of anything, that really wasn't his concern, because loyalty was number one. So during one of these rounds of one group getting sacked and the other one being brought in, they had to decided to let a few people out by saying, well, maybe some mistakes were made, and that's why those other people were sacked, and now we have new, brighter people. And my grandfather managed to be one of the people that came out. Now, the thing was that my grandfather came out, and he came back to Moscow, and he couldn't talk about what happened to him. That was not allowed because that was dangerous. But the very fact that he made it out gave a lot of people hope. So what I was told what happened is when he came out, people would come to my grandparents' house, and they would just quietly come into the house, they would look at Grandpa, and they would leave. Because that's all they could do. But just even seeing this one person that made it out gave them hope that maybe their loved ones, somebody that they lost, that they knew didn't do anything wrong, maybe someday they would come back. Here is a poster from GPU, which was one of the predecessors of KGB and any other secret police you want to name. But here it is, striking with the lightning of revolution, revolutionary lightning. One of these counter-revolutionaries, enemies of the people, that is obviously trying to do us, the good Soviet people, harm. And here's a picture. In Stalin's concentration camps, cameras were never allowed. So there are no pictures that we have that survived that showed what took place. The really little evidence, visual evidence of we have of this whole experience was what we got from people who survived and then made drawings. This is one such drawing. The interesting thing here is that this is not an occupation of a hostile army in a hostile land. This is Russians against Russians. This is what a dictatorship, total dictatorship looks like. Interestingly enough, many of these concentration camps are still, they're still around because they were built in such sub-zero freezing temperatures that even though they're being no longer used, they're just sitting there. And here's a picture of Stalin and one of his generals supposedly viewing the troops. A couple of things about this picture that are worth noting. First of all, for a kid growing up in Soviet Union, there was no Macy's Day Parade. The biggest, funnest parade you could ever see was the Soviet military parade. And these were a couple of times a year during different holidays. I think the Victory Day, May 9th, which is we just passed the victory in World War II, and the Soviet Revolution, which is 7th of November. October Revolution, 7th of November. Did anybody catch that? That it doesn't line up? October Revolution, 7th of November? Might as well clarify because maybe someday you'll go, didn't he just say? So here's the situation. The Russian Orthodox Church followed a calendar that was 2 weeks off from the rest of the world. So forget the time zones. It's that there's real actually 14-day difference or 13 days. So when the Soviets came to power, first thing they did is they matched up the calendar with the rest of the world, which results in all sorts of interesting side effects because like Russians will celebrate major holidays twice, following the new calendar and following the old calendar. Like there's the Christmas and then there's the old Christmas, and then there's the New Year and the old New Year. Usually old holiday means that it's just adults getting together and drinking, which is pretty much every holiday anyway. What we see here with the military holidays, that was kind of fun for me as a boy because in Soviet Union nobody had guns except for the military. So in the United States, anybody, they have enough money, they can go at some point and buy themselves, you know, pretty much most any rifle they ever want. It's just a matter of having the money. In Soviet Union, nobody owned the guns. They were like this mystique, magical things that some people out there, somebody has. So looking at major tanks and rockets was much more interesting. Are these followed with anything or just like wake you up? Okay. Awake! All right. I play a lot of piano in nursing homes and I hear those sounds all the time, but they're usually followed by something else. So here's a picture of my grandfather at ripe old age. Here's a picture of my grandmother, who was an attorney, and she passed away in 1963. In Soviet Union, every attorney basically got paid the same. It didn't matter which kind of law you practiced. So my grandmother was a public defender. She really liked it. It was very well respected. And here's a picture of her sitting. My mom is on her mom's lap. And so that's probably 1949, 1950. And I believe that was my mom who colored in the picture herself. Because of course the dress must have been pink. Here's a picture of my dad's side of the family. And the young man right there at the top, in the middle, is my grandfather Gregory. He their side of the family came from a city called Sevastopol on the Black Sea. And that's where the name Rashkin originates, because there was my old ancestor, I don't know how many generations back, whose last name was Raskin. But he had so many kids, and in Russia, if you had more than a certain number of kids, they had to serve in the military. Well, it's a purpose of every Russian to try to figure out how to avoid serving in the military. What my great-great-great-grandfather did is he took his family and he split them up. So and then he changed one letter in the last name, so now there were, instead of one family, there were several families. It was just enough kids where nobody had to go into the Tsar's army. And so you had your Raskin, which was a starting name, and then there was a Rashkin, a Rankin, and several others, just to make sure that everything worked out. And here I am, Rashkin. Here's a picture of my grandfather Gregory with his mom and what appears to be a dead fox over her shoulder, which was acceptable at the time. It probably still is, I don't know. Here's a picture of my grandmother. This is my dad's mom. She passed away in 1956 at the age of 36 from cancer. She was an interpreter. And so, my dad was raised pretty much by his grandparents in the city of Sevastopol until he was about 10 years of age. Here's an interesting story that I only discovered about a month ago. So we knew that we had this great uncle. His name was Zalman Rubashov, and we knew that he came to some kind of prominence somewhere in Israel. Didn't know what it was, didn't know much about it. So my aunt went to Israel and done some genealogical research. Turned out that Zalman Rubashov became the third president of Israel and is now on money. This is 200 shekels, and this is my great uncle I never knew existed, but there he is. And there's a picture of my grandfather with his second wife and his sister. Here's a picture of my dad as a little kid right there with his grandfather in the city of Sevastopol Over there in the back you can see there's a rug, because every Russian house, if it was nice, they would put up the nice rug on the wall. Because why would you want to put this nice piece of art on the floor where everybody can walk over it all day long? That's just wrong. So you put it on the wall. Here's a picture of my parents. Just a point of reference, my mom was 47 years old when they sold all of their possessions, quit their jobs, and started a brand new life from scratch, just so to give their children, my brother and myself, a chance at better life in America. So that's, to me, that's very impressive, because when we came to the States in 1988, all we had were some suitcases and some things were sent in the mail, and that was it. One of the things that Mom ended up doing, she wanted to be a doctor growing up, but when she was ready to go to college, even though Joseph Stalin was already dead for 5 years, his campaign of anti-Semitism, because we're all Jewish, was alive and well. And so Mom couldn't be a doctor because they just got done fighting Jewish doctors and how they were evil people. So Jews were not allowed to become doctors in Soviet Union for a while. And so she instead became a musician, and she got accepted to Moscow Conservatory, and she was an excellent piano player. She passed away in 2002 from cancer. Now with me, people know that I play piano, but Mom was 10 times better than I ever will be. She was working as a piano accompanist in different ballet schools and musical theater schools, and she worked in Moscow in a ballet school of Bolshoi Theater, which was, still is the premier theater in the world. And my dad is a professional puppeteer. And there is such a thing. How that happened is, there was a famous puppeteer who persuaded Joseph Stalin that because puppets are part of Russian culture, which they are, that there should be a puppet theater in every major Russian Soviet city. So what they did, because it's centralized planning, and that means that whatever you have government in Moscow, they decide what's going to happen, they decided to build these puppet theaters throughout Soviet Union in major population centers. Well, that's all well and good, but now you got to educate and train people who are going to be working there. So they had theater schools with puppetry departments. And so my dad became graduated as director of puppet theater and directed many plays. Here's the place where I grew up in Moscow. It's a very interesting location called Patriarch Pond. And it's about one city block each way. In the summer you have swans right there, the little doghouse floating around. That's where swans live. And the building in the back, the yellow house, is that was the ice skate rental place. So when the rink would freeze up in the winter, you would go and rent your ice skates over there if you didn't have your own, and skate around. This was a very famous Moscow location for several reasons. First of all, it was very cinematic, and so it was featured in many films and TV shows and so on and so on. But also it was the setting, the first scene of a very famous novel took place, the setting is the park. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the other thing about the park was the sculpture garden. And the sculpture garden featured Ivan Andreevich Krylov, who is the Russian poet, 19th century, who wrote for Russian kids, rewrote Aesop's Fables. Has anybody here heard of Aesop's Fables? Raise your hand if you have. All right, so I'm not alone. Excellent. So Aesop was a Greek poet who, thousands of years ago, who wrote these stories that taught people little lessons on morals and virtues, and they usually featured animals. Because, again, when you live in a censored dictatorship, you can't write about Bob Smith, you write about Little Monkey. That had the same qualities as the person you don't like. The other thing about Soviet Union was, imagine growing up in a culture where you have no access to the Bible. So imagine the kind of role that Bible plays in our culture and the references that we make to it all the time, that didn't really exist. So people thought that Bible was a really cool thing because it was forbidden, basically. So we would get all of our biblical references and ideas through other books, through other secondary references. And in that environment, you have fables that become much more important to people because you still look for some kind of way to get those morality and values lessons out. Krylov's fables were very, very popular and are still memorized by kids. The irony, of course, is that he died from overeating pancakes. So you can say that there's an irony there, but I'll let you guys determine exactly what the morality lesson is in that particular story. And these are the statues from the fables. You have your donkey playing violin, bear playing cello, and the monkey conducting the animal orchestra. Then you have elephant, you have another statue here, you have, I think this was a monkey with a mirror, and there you have a wolf and a sheep. We'll talk about it a little bit later. A little bit of personal history here. Don't want to step on any show pieces. These two trees were the goalposts because this was my backyard. This is where we played soccer. So these were the goalposts, and this is the net. We knew that the ball wouldn't fly very far because it would just hit the back of the statue. It was awesome. And here's workers, city workers doing some maintenance on a statue. That was kind of how we could tell. This is the totem pole of my playground as growing up as a kid. Kids who were, the very first thing they could climb on was the pedestal right here. If they were able to scale that, we were like, okay, you're in. Now, if they were getting older, it means they could climb here on the knee. And if they were really daredevils, then they would climb up on the neck and on the head. So this is how we knew who stood up where in the rank at the playground. Of course, usually the ones that would climb on the head, they were just too dangerous. And here's a picture of the wolf and the sheep. And obviously a wolf is telling the sheep to come over, and the sheep is not too thrilled about it. Yeah, kind of scary. Here's a picture of my mom. Like I mentioned, she passed away in 2002, but before her passing, she got to go back to Russia. I've never been back, and it's been about 24 years now. I'm thinking maybe we'll go next year. But because of her experience, and because she knew so many Russian ballet stars, like Mikhail Baryshnikov, if anybody here is interested either in ballet or in Sex and the City, they probably encountered that name. So Baryshnikov was one of her students when she was playing piano. And so her University of Utah insisted that she come with them just so that she could meet and introduce everybody, which she did. So she got to go back. That was neat. We lived in this house on the 6th floor, a couple of windows over. It was really kind of neat because first of all, I can find my old house on Google Earth, which is unexpected. Second of all, this house was built in stages. First it was the 3-story, then they built 4th and 5th floor, and then they built the 6th floor. We lived on the 6th floor, which was very nice. At some point they even put in the elevator. Here's Master and Margarita, the novel I wanted to mention to you. What happened here is, this is a novel by Mikhail Bulgakov, written in the mid-1930s, and it features adventures of Devil, who decides to come back to mid-1930s Moscow with his cohorts and check out what is this Soviet Union thing all about. And he leaves none too impressed. In the middle of it all, there's also a different retelling of the story of the Jesus Christ. And considering that it involved politics and religion, two things, people hardly want to talk about with their friends, that was really not a good subject to discuss in the Soviet Union. So, the wife of the author was supposed to burn the book after his death, which he didn't do, thank goodness. And I believe in the early 1960s, this book was actually finally published. And it's a classic of Soviet literature. If you have a chance, Master and Margarita, should check it out. It is also obviously redone here as a graphic novel, which is something I should probably check it out one of these days. And the reason that I brought it in is because the first scene of the book starts at the park where I grew up that I talked to you about a couple of minutes ago. And as kids, we would play there, and we would have tourists who would come in and say, "Oh my gosh, oh wow, where did they sit? What bench did they sit on? Where did all of this take place?" And we would say, "Oh, that bench over there." I don't know. Because we were just kids playing, but we knew this was part of the park's lore, was that this book took place there. Now, the author himself died in the late 1930s, and his apartment was blocked from entrance from that point on until, I don't know if it is open now. But the stairwell became a place where people came to pay tribute to their favorite author. So they would come in and they would cover the stairwell with graffiti, with quotes from the book, with pictures and paintings of characters from the book, and all sorts of imagery and text. And then once in a while, a painter would come from the city, and he or she would take white paint and cover all of it completely, this total art. And then people would come back and do it all over again. So it was kind of a living memorial. Here's a picture of me carrying lots of play guns to arm all my playground friends so we could go and play war. Here's a picture of my school. My parents really wanted me to go to a specialized school, and in Soviet Union, if you wanted to go to a specialized school, those were either math specialized or languages or arts or music, but they were like a specialized skill. Otherwise, you went to a regular school. So my parents got me accepted into the music school, and so I play violin, upright bass, and bass guitar, and piano. The curriculum of the school was really kind of neat because it had mixed curriculum. You would start with maybe like gym, then you would have sight singing, solfege, math, choir. It was just kind of, everything was intermixed like almost a college curriculum. The school was located in an old mansion, and in front of the school was the statue bust of the person for whom the street was named. The street was named for Mikhail Frunze, who was a Soviet revolutionary leader. And he was kind of an interesting story because he died fairly early on in the struggle for power that they had in the Soviet Union. Stalin came to power in 1929. In 1925, Frunze was told he had some stomach problems. He went for surgery and never came out. So he was killed early on as a charismatic leader, taken out of the running. Because you know what, it is much easier to celebrate your dead opponents and build up monuments for them than deal with them when they're alive. Here's my class picture from first grade. And through the magic of Facebook, I now know what happened to several of those wonderful people. So this must be first grade, so what, 82, 83? Let's see, Max is now a sports reporter, and he travels all over Europe writing about sports. Paul got a PhD from MIT and is busy doing different things. He's at least sometimes he writes music. Irene is a violin player in Germany. Alexei is a cello player. I think he's based in Britain. He travels all over the world. Elena is a jazz piano player in LA. Karina is a radio host and an actress in Moscow. Katya is a piano player in Britain, travels all over the world. There's me. There is Elena. She's a violin player in Moscow. And Igor is a bassoon player in Israel, plays with some fancy orchestras. And this guy, all I knew about him was that he was a pretty good soccer player, a cello player, and his nose always ran. It was like, you know, this kid in the park that his nose always runs. Like, what is it? What is he going to amount to? Turns out he became a very fancy chef in Moscow, owned several restaurants, and now splits his time between Moscow and India, where he opened a resort on the Indian Ocean shore, and he's also a DJ. He keeps inviting me to come and travel and visit. I think I should. So there's a picture of me playing violin, and there's a picture of me with hair. This is not photoshopped. I just wanted to include that to make sure you knew. The other thing is, I'm wearing a uniform because all Russian school kids wore uniforms, and we were all Boy Scouts, which was mandatory. In 3rd grade, we all became Boy Scouts. Pioneers, they were called in Soviet Union. And if you look at the backdrop of the picture, it may look like this is 1950s or something. You have that old speaker. We had a record player for whatever we needed in a big box. And this was actually 1987, possibly 1988. Here is a performance hall where we performed in the school. This was like torture chamber, because I had to play juries every semester. Knees shaking, you know, your future's on the line, you're 10 years old. Great memories. So, moving on to the next one. Soviet subway. Moscow, St. Petersburg. In Soviet Union, subway stations were known as workers' palaces, because in a country where, at least ideologically, everything belongs to everyone, these palaces become the stations that are like, here we see a subway station. It's like a glorified bus station. It's efficient, it's hopefully clean, it gets you there, in and out, that's it. In the Soviet Union, they were palaces. This is a picture of the station that I lived closest to. And it was, first of all, very deep underground, because they were used as bomb shelters during World War II. But also they have mosaics up where you see these circles. There's mosaics there, and they show life, scenes of happy life in Soviet Union. We could always tell as locals who the tourists are, because the tourists would be walking around like this, because the mosaics were incredible. But amazing thing, if you're a local, no thing can faze you anymore where you live. So here's another picture of another station, and another one. This is actually, the reason I'm showing it to you is because this was the station that I would start my trip to school. It lasted about 30 minutes every day. It was 10 minutes on the bus, 10 minutes on the subway. I would go into that station that you saw. I would come out at this station, and then I would walk for 10 minutes to school. And here's another picture of that first station. You see marble floors, elaborate mosaics. That's a subway station. Here's the map of Moscow subway. Because the school that I went to was a citywide school, then in order for me to visit my classmates and play buddies and play friends, I would have to get on my train station here and travel somewhere here, transfer, travel some more, get on the bus. Done, you know, hour and a half later, I would be at my friend's house ready to play for the day, and that was when I was 10, 11. Now my daughter, we live in Janesville, obviously, and she's 11, crosses the street in Janesville, unsupervised. I get nervous. Here's a story of a car. My dad always wanted to have a car. But in Soviet Union, you had to stand in line to get a car, and there was also no credit, so you had to have the money handy. Obviously, lots of people still had cars, then that's really is explained by a lot of corruption in society. So, here's the car that Dad wanted to have, but here's the car he actually got. It's air coolant. You have the little air coolant opening gill in the back. I think it's powered by 1.5 squirrels. It's got an engine in the back. And as Dad would joke, if you were going downhill with the wind in the right direction, you could get it up to 115 kilometers an hour, which is not very fast. So, this is how it looked from the back. One day, Dad managed to drive into a stationary object and totaled the car, which wouldn't take much. And he couldn't find the replacement part to fix the car, so he eventually managed to find a new body for the car. So instead of this car, he now had this car, which was still the very same car underneath, it just had a different body. And so Dad was very proud of it, and he was actually telling me of all sorts of neat places he was able to turn the car around on. And here we're going to get to watch a little video. So I will just put it this way. If you guys think you know Winnie the Pooh, you do not.